All right. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, like Jay said, jacked up my knee this weekend playing with my son, so apologize. I'm not going to be very mobile. But I want to welcome all of you. And I also wanted to take a moment to actually get you all to give a little round of applause to the organizers of this event, because it takes a lot of work, and this is really nice. They volunteer a lot of their time. I've been around the DevOpsdays I guess, paradigm universe for a while, and yeah, it's not an easy task. They give up a lot of time for this, so again, thank you all for doing that, and the speakers as well. Not me, of course. I'm not including myself in that. But yeah, today I want to talk to you about CI/CD agility and controlling pipeline sprawl. So if you don't know what I'm talking about here, I'll get into it, and hopefully you'll understand. So I spent a lot of time thinking about how to work smarter, not harder. And in this industry, we get hit with the word agile or agility, right? And if you look at the definition of that, it's basically the ability to move quickly and easily. Now, that's great, but we work in DevOps, right? We're at Devopsdays. So I came up with this term called CI/CD agility. I also work at Circleci, so this actually makes total sense to me. And I created a new definition for it, right? And it's basically the ability to move continuously, quickly, and easily. Now, you know, as developers, we're inundated with creating continuous integration and continuous delivery practices and principles within our organizations and teams. And to achieve that, right, we actually need to execute on that by implementing CI/CD tooling. And today's talk is going to be centered around some of the obstacles that we all encounter, right? And by the way, this is going to be a talk about the obstacles that are common throughout all CI/CD tooling out there, for the most part. Some may not have some of the things I'm talking about, but in general, most of the tooling does have these issues. But before we get into that, I want to speak a little bit about myself. My name is Angel Rivera. I'm a developer advocate for Circleci. I started off my career in the United States Air Force Space Command as a developer, and through the years worked through, with startups, private industry, and now I'm working for Circleci as a developer advocate. And in my role as a developer advocate, I get to speak at events like this and engage with folks like yourselves, developers, operations folks, DevOps people, business analysts, right? And in these conversations, I'm constantly learning how people are using technology. And in my role, I bring that information back to my team so that we can build tooling that's valuable and features that are valuable to you all. And in my discussions, I'm constantly figuring out how folks, the challenges people are having, actually. And that's really, it's a really nice thing to hear how people are using technology and figure out their pain points, right? So this talk is based upon some of that feedback and conversations that I've had. And the biggest topic that came up in these conversations regarding CI/CD were managing pipelines at scale. Anybody in the room have problems doing that today? Raise your hand. Yeah, there should be a few of you there. And right now, the tooling, right, like I said, they have issues. But these topics here, security and pipeline sprawl, are the two main topics that I'm going to discuss today. Now, there's a ton of other information I could provide you, but got 30 minutes, so we'll keep it short. So let's talk about security first, right? Obviously, that's paramount in pretty much anything we do. It should be, at least. But you'd be surprised. There are organizations and teams out there that really don't put security at the forefront because maybe it's limiting their operation. But at the end of the day, I'm here to tell you that it's very important, and it's only going to get even more important, right? And companies that you're dealing with today are going to put stricter and stricter scrutiny right around security. So what I'm going to talk about in the security realm is secrets, right? We all use them in our systems, in our pipelines, to connect to other systems and databases, right? To basically grab information that we need to process when we're doing our builds or our testing. They're really important, and they need to be protected. A lot of times, they're not protected within pipelines, right? I can tell you right now, there are tons of tooling out there that expose these secrets, unintentionally, of course, but they're still exposed. Some of the other complaints and problems that we have within the industry, these are not new, right? Weak passwords or secrets. And we also have the issue with stale secrets, which means that they're not being refreshed or changed often enough within the pipelines. We also have the basically issue where we're storing credentials in clear text in the CI/CD runtimes. So when you execute a job, a lot of times the platforms that are out there have the information secured at rest, right? And then that information obviously gets triggered, but the job gets triggered, the information needs to be pushed out. And in flight, it's also usually very well secured with TLS or SSL. But once it hits that runtime where they're executing the code for the build, a lot of times they're just stored environment variables in clear text. And if any bad actor or anyone with malicious intent gains access to that runtime, you're pretty much open for compromise, right? You're exposed. So how do we adequately protect these pipelines? In my conversations, one of the ways that folks are doing this is by utilizing secrets management, right? Employing policies around secrets. And if you want to implement that, you're obviously going to need tooling to do that. And the tooling generally protects you because it will protect your secrets. It also generates passwords for you. It can do a lot of cool things around security and protecting secrets. There's a ton of tooling out there. There's a lot of open source tooling, but I prefer to use HashiCorp's Vault. It seems to be one of the well-supported ones in the industry and in the community. So if you're looking to implement some sort of secrets management or tooling, definitely take a look at Vault. By implementing these tools, right, it can help you with random password generation. So you can generate these really strong passwords, and then also they're randomly generated, so a human doesn't know what these things are, right? Which is super cool because you're protecting your system and your secrets. These systems also enable you to auto-rotate, right? So now your pipelines can get fresh credentials or secrets when they need them. Some folks I've talked to implement, a 1-hour policy, so every hour these things are refreshed, and when their pipelines are executed, they're grabbing, new secrets. And some folks maybe even do it once a week, right? But whatever it is, there's still a nice layer of protection there that I definitely would recommend. If you're not doing it already, start looking at it. So now that we have our pipelines protected, I'm going to recap security. So if you're not using a secrets management policy or tooling, definitely take a look at that to start implementing some things that will help you integrate into your pipelines. And then you can generate random strong passwords and auto-rotate them based on whatever policy your organization utilizes. So let's talk about pipeline sprawl. This is the bulk of the presentation. I kind of came up with this term because a lot of the configuration tooling out there are generally running in a file configuration. So what that means is you have one code repository, and then you have your pipelines defined in what we call a configuration file. And most tooling modern tooling, CI/CD tooling, operates this way. It's a really nice way to operate because your pipeline configurations are listed in code, right, or defined in code, and it lives with your code base usually, which is cool, but it does present some problems. So again, here's the ratio, right? So, and by the way, this is a general this is general math. It doesn't apply to every organization or team. I understand that folks may have a whole different configuration, but in general, in my conversations, this is how most people operate. It's one code repository, right? And then one pipeline configuration file per. And most of the time, these configuration files use YAML as their data structure syntax. Who here in the room is a fan of YAML? That's more than I thought. I actually, when I first started at Circle, I was like, oh, what's this YAML shit? Like, really? Can I just do this in JSON? And then I actually wrote my pipelines in JSON, and I wrote a parser to then feed Circle, the YAML. And yeah, don't do that. I was like, this is terrible. It was so much work. And I was like, yeah, now I learned to love and appreciate YAML. The problem with YAML is folks want to do things in it, like, processes and functions and, just do logical computing in it. It's not possible because YAML is a data structure, right? It's not a programming language. And, all too many times, I was speaking with someone recently who was like, oh, I like YAML because you can comment in it, but I wish JSON had comments. I'm like, well, they're built for different things. But YAML is, like I said, is a data structure. The reason why we use it, I believe, is it's more of a descriptive data structure, right? So it lends itself for like human readability, and it's not as hazy as the braces and the comments and the quotes or the semicolons and stuff like that within JSON. So YAML does lend itself. It's also being used, right? We're all DevOps folks here, so we're using it in most cloud-native technologies and projects these days. Kubernetes, right? If you want to do anything in Kubernetes, you generally have to have a YAML file, right, that accompanies that stuff. So the limitations that YAML has, though, are it can be redundant. Since you can't do any kind of variable declarations in it, or you can't do any kind of looping through structures, the reusability of that YAML is nil, right? Unless you're using maybe anchors. There are anchors there, but even that's kind of tedious. And what happens is your syntax starts to grow. As your pipelines grow and you add functionality and tests and processes, right, and commands, that's going to grow. It's going to grow exponentially. So that means your file itself will grow in complexity as well. And it becomes really hard to navigate and manage, right, as we all know. So that also bleeds into what I call repo sprawl. So now, remember the math? It was one repository per configuration file. So imagine if you had 100 repos, and then each repo has one configuration file, right? That's a 100 to 100 amount there. And then if you have to make a change to one configuration file, and that command that you're changing has to propagate over to 100 repos, that's a lot of change, right? So again, that repo sprawl now becomes difficult to maintain. These are all common problems when you're dealing with CI/CD tooling. And we have a dilemma, right? So how do we solve this? Some folks have suggested GitOps, right? But if you look at the nature of GitOps and what it is, it's dealing with basically one repository. So you're not able to span across multiple repositories if you're using GitOps. Now, by the way, maybe smarter minds in the future will figure this out, but currently I haven't seen anything that can, regarding GitOps, that can kind of give us what we need when we're trying to control this pipeline sprawl. So GitOps is not viable. Now, what are our options? Well, I took an approach of looking at this as a developer, right? Creating separations of concern. Now, when you're doing that, you have to start by finding the commonalities and patterns, right, in your pipeline. So let's take an example of an S3 upload, right? So I want to upload, in all of my pipelines, I'm uploading an artifact to S3. Whether that's true or not, it's fine, but that's a common thing. And I'm going to use that example throughout. So I already identified, right, the commonality, which is the S3 upload. I create an abstraction. And then I encapsulate create a template, like a class, the object-oriented programming paradigms, right? We encapsulate that functionality into a class or some sort of template. And then we parameterize that stuff, so that makes it reusable. And then you have portability, and you're able to create modules that can be shared throughout your organization or your team or even your repositories, right? So this is a good example of a hard-coded command within a YAML file. I lifted this out of one of my example Circleci configuration files. And basically, it's really simple, right? The reason why I say it's hard-coded is if you look at that command key there, I'm literally calling it an AWS S3 function, and then I'm copying an artifact to a bucket, right? That's cool. It's just one command. It shouldn't hurt. But if you have to multiply that by 1,000 times, if you have to change that, maybe the file name changes or the bucket changes, now you have to update this configuration 1,000 times if it exists in your files. That's a huge problem. Even if you write automation to do this, right, or write another script to do this, you still have to validate your automation to make sure that it's updating properly, right? So it's a hard problem. So my recommendation is don't hardcode your YAML, right? And create pipeline libraries. And when you do that, you're basically divorcing, right, that functionality that you need from your YAML, and you're giving yourself a good, flexibility, some dynamic functions in there. But basically, my advice is start thinking of things as just like a programming, paradigm, and create dependency libraries or pipeline, what I call pipeline libraries. And these could be Python scripts, Go scripts, Bash scripts, which are really popular. But whatever it is, or even PowerShell, just start thinking of, encapsulating that functionality outside of the YAML itself. So this is an example of what I'm talking about. So remember the example that I previously showed you about the hard-coded YAML? Start thinking of things like this, creating environment variables that give you some flexibility in naming things. And then if you look at the second run command and the command key there, I'm calling out an S3 upload script. So if you just have a generic, hey, S3 call, right, and upload it, and you feed in these arguments, which are the jar file and then the bucket, you now have a flexible, reusable module for your CI/CD pipelines. And that gives you the ability to actually essentially manage that functionality. So if you need to change one thing in there, you're doing it, right, from a central location, and it'll propagate over to the other places you're using this library, right? It also adds portability, again, and minimizes vendor lock-in. Who here loves vendor lock-in? That's, wow. Well, he works for Microsoft, so that's that's fair. That's fair. We'll let that one go. But no, at the end of the day, right, we all experience some sort of lock-in. I don't care if you're using an open source project, you're still kind of locked into that technology. And I am a big proponent of, kind of limiting the control that that technology and tools have on your day-to-day operations. So it definitely helps with that. So if you have to change a CI/CD tooling to another tooling, if you have this, pipelines library kind of set up, it's really easy to just, basically create some new YAML or whatever it is that they want you to use in this new tooling, and then call out to your Bash scripts or your libraries, right? So that helps with that minimizing vendor lock-in. At Circleci, we solved this by creating a product called Orbs, and it's like a hybrid feature / open source project, but it enables our developers to build out encapsulated YAML and parameterized YAML. So now we host that on the Orbs registry, and that gives them that centrally managed location. And if they decide so, they could actually share that within their teams and organizations, or make it public, and people can actually use those. So yeah, it's a really cool way to kind of solve this pipeline sprawl problem. But again, it does, I'll be honest, it has a little bit of lock in there if you don't, but you can still create orbs that call out to your libraries. I would still recommend doing that. But it does streamline that pipeline, that config file a little bit, right? So it helps with not having so much volume within the config file. So yeah, real quick to recap pipeline sprawl. Encapsulate your builds, and then create extraction, encapsulation, and then identify common patterns in pipelines, and you can use that to consolidate and centrally manage your code. And then, of course, the scripting will help you to minimize vendor lock-in and add a ton of portability. I think that's it for today. Do we have any time for questions, if anybody has one? Awesome. So does anybody have any questions about this? All right, thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it.